All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to read the epilogue. So when the book has an epilogue, that's giving you a glimpse into what life was like after the story ended. So the book ended with Tiamat was gone. Clutching the rough bark, he began to sob. Here's where the epilogue begins. The summer dragged in a blur of emptiness. Jeremy watched Specimen paint the window of Zambrino's department store. Although Specimen invited him to help, Jeremy couldn't bring himself to lift a brush. He hadn't done a bit of art since Midsummer Night. Fat Pete returned in July, wearing a new scar and crankier than ever. Howard and Freddie whispered to each other whenever they saw Jeremy in the park, but they stayed away from him, as they did ever since Jeremy and Tiamat had chased Freddie away. Mary Lou gave up trying to talk to him, watched with sorrowful eyes as he moved further and further into himself. His parents grew increasingly worried. When his mother asked, "Why don't you draw anymore, sweetheart?" as she did on several occasions, Jeremy only shrugged. He didn't know how to explain. He couldn't even explain it to himself. He didn't want to go back to the library either. He didn't want to see Miss Priest. Not that he blamed her for the loss of Tiamat, at least not much. He just didn't want to see her. In August, she sent him a note, telling him he could have the book that she had loaned him. "It's not a library book," she wrote. "Rather, it's from my private collection. Keep it as a thank you for your efforts." He thought often of the words she had whispered to him the night Tiamat left. "Midsummer night will break your heart. All Hallows Eve may patch it." I'm going to read that part again because it's super important. Miss Priest had said, "Midsummer night will break your heart. All Hallows Eve may patch it." What was that supposed to mean? Time heals everything? Big deal. He knew he would get over this sooner or later, in a way, but nothing could convince him that life would ever be the same as it had been when he had a dragon. Summer came to an end. He started 7th grade, which meant a new school and new teachers. He moved through the halls as if he were just visiting, never becoming part of it. He carried Tiamat's tear with him everywhere he went. In October, his parents decided to have a party. "An old-fashioned Halloween party," his father had said, trying to inspire a little enthusiasm in Jeremy. "We'll have a bonfire in the field, fresh cider, real costumes, no store-bought stuff allowed." Jeremy smiled grimly and helped with the preparations. His father lit the bonfire with a great ceremony, announcing they were celebrating a night when magic was let loose upon the world. "Isn't it beautiful?" asked Mary Lou, walking up to stand beside him. She was dressed like a witch. Jeremy shrugged. The leaping flames reminded him of Tiamat. It hurt to watch them. Several other kids from school were at the party. Jeremy said hello to each of them, but not much else. His eyes were continually drawn back to the bonfire. As he watched the dancing flames, he felt something struggling to break free inside him. To his surprise, Miss Priest showed up at the party. "Your mother invited me," she murmured when she saw him at the refreshment table. "I hope you don't mind." He shook his head numbly, but when he got a chance, he fled to the barn. Crawling into the stall where Tiamat had stayed, he pulled the diamond tear from his pocket and began to weep. He began to cry. His eyes burned, and his throat felt like it was on fire. The weeping passed like a storm. Lying on the straw, he stared into the darkness, listening to the noises of the party outside. He was drifting off to sleep when a swirl of color flowed through his head. Shivering, he sat up. Suddenly, the nearly forgotten scar where Tiamat's tooth had pierced his palm began to throb. Sweat poured off of his brow. He felt like someone had pounded a wedge into the back of his skull and was trying to lift off the top of his head. He clawed at the stall wall in a panic until suddenly he understood what was happening. Tiamat was back. T, where are you? Here, she whispered inside of his head. He spun around and she was nowhere in sight. He turned again. Where are you? He thought desperately, terrified by the idea that he had lost the ability to see her. Here, right here with you. Finally, he understood. She was not back in this world. She was still in her world where she belonged. But she was back inside his head. Even better, he was inside her head. He was seeing through her eyes, feeling through her skin. What he saw was a world filled with dragons. What he felt was big. We are big, Tiamat announced. Then she spread her wings, his wings, their wings, and threw herself from the edge of a cliff. Jeremy's heart lurched with fear, but the leathery wings caught an updraft, and with a sudden rush, Tiamat began to soar upward. Jeremy looked down from a dizzying height. The air was filled with dragons, great beasts of power and majesty, creatures with jeweled eyes and burnished skins. He caught another current of hot air in his wings and spiraled upward, looking out over a world of ferocious beauty. High volcanic mountains capped with plumes of smoke and ash were feeding fire to the sky. Dragons soared and wheeled above and between the mountains, spiraling up on the currents of hot air that filled with leathery wings. Let's see if I can turn this so you can still see it. Okay. Like sparks spiraling up from a bonfire, the world of dragons, Tiamat's world, and now, suddenly, it was Jeremy's world too. I missed you, he thought to Tiamat. And I missed you, she replied back. She said it in his mind. She said it out loud, and when she spoke, it was with a tongue of fire. Her flames curled through the sky, and in them he read the promise that he could return to this world every night. When he dreamed, he would dream of dragons. With Tiamat, he would slither into jewel-studded caves, soar through ash-dark skies, and study ancient mysteries. Fire in his eyes, Jeremy decided to rejoin the party. When Miss Priest saw him, she smiled. Reaching into her cape, she took out a ring and slipped it onto her left hand. In the light of the bonfire, Jeremy could see that the stone set in the top of her ring was a tear-shaped diamond. He raised a questioning eyebrow, looking more like his father than he would have guessed. Miss Priest smiled and nodded and touched her lips with her finger. Then she turned and vanished into the night. The next morning, Jeremy went to his desk, humming contently. He arranged his pencils in front of him. He took out some paper and he began to draw.